So my ruling is that I'm going to call one more time for a speaker. Oh, Senator Brown.
Senator, ruling too, you don't want us to talk? I think you
No,
want
man,
us to
I think
talk.
that my ruling is very clear, you know. Senator Brown.
Mr. President, I prepared a speech this morning, but we have long tuned out of this government as the Jamaican people have tuned them out. Let them talk, let them talk, let them talk. What the people are waiting for is for them to call the elections so we can vote them out. And that's all I have to say this evening. The speech is here, talking about growth, taxes, but we don't need to. The people are ready to vote out when the innings done. Call it, Andrew, call it.
Kind of ridicule Lambert Brown gets every time the public sees him. Yes?
Minister, you have any more speakers? Minister, you have any more? Senator Morgan. Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you very much, Senator Brown. Senator Brown. Senator Brown, thank you very much. Senator Morgan.
Kind of ridicule Lambert Brown gets every time the public sees him. Yes? Mr. President, this debate on the appropriation bill for the 2025-2026 fiscal year directly precedes what will be one of the most consequential general elections in Jamaica's history. It is decision time. Jamaica's successes must not be imperiled. The gains we have secured and the strides we have made over successive political administrations must not be reversed. Jamaica must continue to move forward into a bright, sustainable, and prosperous future. We must not go backwards. And so, as we propel to decision-making time, action time, we on this side, Mr. President, invite the Jamaican people to carefully consider what is happening, and we urge them to choose Jamaica. And importantly, Mr. President, notwithstanding those who would seek to decry and shout down Jamaica, the Jamaican economy is projected to return to growth in this, the first quarter of 2025 calendar year. The stability and resilience we enjoy have not come about by chance. They have come on the back of hard work, steely resolve, discipline, and responsible actions by an active and strong government. A caring government, a fiscally responsible government, a government led by the best and the most effective Prime Minister in the history of Jamaica. Even in an election year, Mr. President, we are being fiscally responsible. We are not running with it. Mr. President, there is no doubt that notwithstanding the political divide, both the Jamaica Labour Party government and the Opposition PNP want Jamaica to get to the same destination ultimately. Believe it or not, even Senator Brown wants Jamaica to get to a particular destination ultimately. Where the stark divergence emerges, Mr. President, is as to how we propose to get there. Our approach is to maintain economic stability, give dividends to the worthy and deserving Jamaican people, boost economic activity, and foster accelerated growth, and generate even more tax revenues without imposing new taxes, which will ultimately create a brighter, more prosperous future for every Jamaican, even those yet to be born. On this side, Mr. President, we are proud that we have presented 9 consecutive budgets with no new taxes. The Opposition PNP purports to be committed to fiscal discipline, but it is not in their DNA. Who among us who occupies a space in this chamber benefited from the destructive and unsustainable high interest rate policies of the 1990s to mid-2000s? Auditor is in this chamber. You're a misguided guy. You are deluded. And you are delusional, quite frankly.
Press on, man. Press on.
Who is the Tapanaris who occupies a place in this chamber who benefited from the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in this country? When asked about the sordid, vexing, and polarizing debacle that is the financial sector collapse of the mid to late 1990s, which culminated in the creation of FinSAC, opposition leader Mark Golding, instead of exhibiting contrition, instead of assuming a posture of penitence and taking the opportunity to unreservedly apologize on behalf of the PNP he leads to the people of Jamaica for ruining our country's public finances and many businesses and lives, he remarked at a PNP press conference just 2 days ago the following.
I had no role in FinSat whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well. So, you know, that was an environment we all had to navigate who were in the sector at that time, and we did it skillfully enough that we never had to ask FinSat for any support.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. While the opposition leader had an "it wasn't me" moment like Shaggy, speaking at a Gleaner's editors forum on his antecedents in terms of how he came to be involved in politics and the PNP, opposition leader Mark Golding, notwithstanding what he said 2 days ago at a press conference when a certain question was put to him, he said the following, speaking some time ago at a Gleaner editors forum, Mr. President.
I came into the party through Dr. Omar Davis because I knew him in the financial sector, where I had been like one of the leading corporate lawyers in Jamaica and very involved in financial engineering. And so when he was Minister of Finance, a lot of the things that required industry input, I was one of the representatives of the industry that he would deal with. I got to know him through that. And that's how I got into the PNP, really, through my relationship with him.
Make of that what you will, Mr. President. And I would make that same point to Jamaica. Indeed, I would commend the financial Gleaner of Friday, December 5, 1997, to colleagues in this chamber, and indeed to the public at large. And that particular report has the following caption: FinSAC to pump $85 million into Billy Craig. I'm commending that for your readership.
According to the Financial Gleaner, published December 5th, 1997, it's titled FinSAC to pump 85 million into Billy Craig. It says the proposed merger between Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank and Deering, Bunting and Golding, which would have seen Glen Rosa, the Craig family holding and company gain 16% of DB&G, has unraveled. A year after the deal was first announced, DB&G boss Peter Bunting revealed that his company will now take over the merchant bank, with Craig family shareholders gaining no shares in DB&G. Instead, FinSAC, the government agency set up to restructure the sector, will pump $85 million into Billy Craig Finance to help shore up its capital base, and DB&G will add another $30 million of its own capital to complete its consolidation of the bank. Effectively, FinSAC appears to have paid $85 million for DB&G to take it off its hands. William Craig Jr. said yesterday that he was relieved by the deal, which should be finalized within days. He stressed that Billy Craig Insurance Brokers was not affected by the latest deal and had a strong balance sheet. Surprising news came after an extended due diligence process by DB&G. For several months, it had been rumored that the merger was taking longer than expected, but FinSAC's intervention will surprise many. DB&G will now absorb Billy Craig Finance as part of its operations and gradually phase out the merchant bank's name in favor of a During, Bunting, and Golding tag. Over the past year, the merchant bank staff has been cut in half, and DB&G has put in its software to improve accounting and management reporting. DB&G posted a net profit of $8 million in 1996. Funds under management grew from $1.6 billion in 1995 to over $2 billion in 1996. For the first 6 months of 1997, after-tax profits grew by over $5 million to $10.2 million compared with the similar period in 96. Earnings per share improved by 2 cents to 9 cents. The news comes after a hectic year for DB&G, which has seen Mr. Bunting and Mark Golding play a more prominent role after Chief Executive Chris During left to work with the West Indies Cricket Board. Gary Sinclair has also stepped up to the plate and increased his management role as the company has significantly expanded its capital base. DB&G raised $51 million at the start of the year through a rights issue. Jamaica Lottery Company purchased a sizable stake in the company, and the Runaway Bay Hotel development, which threatened to hinder the company, now looks like an excellent investment. Prime Minister P.J. Patterson recently broke ground on the project, which will become a new 225-room hotel managed by super clubs as Hedonism 3. The NIBJ has committed to pump $13 million US into the project, and the Caribbean Development Bank will stump up $6 million US, securing the financing for the project. When it is complete, DB&G will own about 40% of the hotel company. Very clear. It's all being revealed now. That blatant lie Mark Golding told yesterday that he had nothing to do with FinSAC. You see how frightened we should be by that? We have the evidence, it's out there. But he had nothing to do with FinSAC. He denied getting sweetheart deals. This man been lying to Jamaica for a long time, you know. He lied about getting the sweetheart deal. Lie, just comfortably, without batting an eyelid, just lie. That's scary, my friends.
Mr. President, critics and cynics the world over assert that one of the more unsavory features of politics and electioneering is that politicians campaign in poetry and govern in prose. Prose, prose. We have been hearing on the political platform from the Opposition PNP, and more so in this process aimed at passing the 2025-2026 budget, a lot of poetry. Pie in the sky promises, if you may. Their bombast, reckless and vulgar promises smack of political desperation and underscores considerable contempt for the Jamaican people. And it is a telling indicator, Mr. President, that the PNP cannot be trusted. This 2025-2026 budget exercise is of particular moment. It is of particular significance, Mr. President. That it is the last budget exercise before the upcoming general elections, which is constitutionally due by September of this year, means that the debate this time around is of added significance. What is it that the parliamentary opposition has sought to hide? Why did they not see it fit to come to the Jamaican people and present a budget that was at least costed, so that a determination could be readily made as to whether their pie-in-the-sky promises are in fact credible, achievable, and sustainable?
Then to you, Mr. Golding, the people were now wondering, why was this costing not added into your budget presentation as part of that budget exercise? Because as understood, it is a budget debate presentation. So why is this costing now coming to the people rather than during the actual budget debates?
Late but to reach. The presentation I made was quite comprehensive. It covered a lot of different things. There were other areas that I had wanted to touch on, which I didn't want to make it too long. The Prime Minister spoke for nearly 5 hours, I think. I didn't think that was appropriate. So, you know, we didn't put in costings because we didn't feel that that was necessary in the presentation itself. We weren't producing a budget. This is what I think is very important. The Minister said it was an implied budget we were presenting. That's not the case. We are presenting our policy priorities for our first term in office. We know we have costed them, as we've explained today, how they break down. 23 billion is our estimate for all of the things that we have put forward as a charge to the budget. Some of the other things will be paid for by the public bodies which relate to those things. And then there's the NHT, which we're going to stop the extraction of resources from. The minister tried to make out that what we were proposing in our presentations was an implied budget. That is not what we were doing. And we never said that we were doing that. We were putting forward our policy commitments for the first term. And the term of office is up to 5 years while we are in government. So the message is simple. The government that we have is one of gimmicks. It's one of misrepresentations. It's one of alarmists. Instead of taking the time to focus on what they could do for the people and how to make the budget work for the people, they again wanted to score headlines at the expense of the people, while the government's was a sideshow to create division and spread misinformation.
Between opposition leader and spokesman, they made promises upon promises upon promises. But did they give the Jamaican people any idea of how much those promises would cost? And whether or not that they would have to cut back on something to do what they're promising? No. They said they are united with fresh ideas and solid plans, ready. But let's see if indeed that would be the case. Madam Speaker, allow me, Madam Speaker, to demonstrate to the people of Jamaica that the promises from the opposition would create FinSAC 2.0. You see, Madam Speaker, the opposition put forward a lot of words with few figures. But within all those pages and pages and pages of words, is a budget, an implied budget, Madam Speaker. And it is that implied budget that I would like all Jamaicans to understand, because it has serious negative ramifications for our future. So, Madam Speaker, let's begin. I will lay out, side by side, the central government's budget for fiscal year 2025-26 and the opposition's implied budget for that fiscal year as well. These are the headings, starting with chart number 1. Yes.
Madam Speaker, I rise on a point of order because the minister is misleading the House. We did not present an implied budget for the coming fiscal year. We presented our proposals, our policy commitments for the next PNP government. And we have never said that they will be implemented in the current fiscal year. They are... As has been said, the budget... After today, the budget would have been passed for the fiscal year. Our proposals represent what we will be doing for the duration of our first term in office. And that is what we were saying. And they will all operate within the current fiscal rules. Stop misleading the House.
Dismiss it. That is no point about it. Turn on our man. A point of disorder. Julia. Julia.
What an admission! My God.
So you heard right at the end a female voice saying, "What an admission!" And you clearly heard Delroy Chuck said, "My God." Well, I have to agree. Yes, my God.
One cousin, relax on the speaker, rule, you know. You can't run from this, you know.
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, this is a budget debate. And anything you put forward has fiscal implications.
If you are trying to sell something while holding back pertinent details regarding what you are selling, you cannot be trusted. Based on what we have seen and based on what we have heard from the PNP in the budget debate, Mr. President, they cannot be trusted. One of our more surgical and probing journalists put the following question to the opposition leader at the hurriedly called and convened PNP press conference 2 days ago. The journalist asked,
pointed out that obviously your priorities will not be the same as the government currently in power. And certainly there's things that you don't have access to in terms of information, but clearly you should, as you see in opposition, see areas where the government has put their priorities that you feel can be deprioritized to implement your programs. What would be those areas?
Mr. President, it's a reasonable question. An extremely important question. Well, the response to that question by the opposition leader was the following.
I don't want to comment on that now because we have to look at every line item when we come into office carefully. And there are some things that we may defer. There's some things that we may accelerate. There's some things that we may discontinue. And I don't want to attempt to foreshadow that yet. But I'm confident that we can find the 6.4% of the 360 billion to pay for what we have come up with.
Mr. President, The wild promises from the PNP are not made carefully. They were not made carefully, but in a bid to evade scrutiny and avert further public ridicule in light of how fiscally imprudent their pie-in-the-sky promises outlined in the budget debate are, Mark Golding, the opposition leader, is telling Jamaica that he would have to think carefully about what areas he would propose to deprioritize, scale down, or discontinue were he to be elected to office in this country. Mr. President, Mark Golding and the PNP are seeking to sell the Jamaican people a puss in a bag. The people should reject them. The people should reject their puss in a bag, as they, the PNP, simply cannot be trusted. Andrew Holness presented a prospectus. Mark Golding presented a puss in a bag. Mr. President, whether they want to characterize the contributions we heard from Julian Robinson and Mark Golding over the past 2 weeks as a budget presentation or a manifesto presentation, the Jamaican people are being urged to note and understand that a budget or manifesto is only as good as the degree to which it is credible. Mr. President, a budget or a manifesto is only as good as the degree to which the persons proposing it have the ability, capacity, and proven track record to deliver on it without mashing up the country. Mr. President, when the PNP now attacks us left, right, and center, as they did between January 2012 and February 2016, when they heaped just about $60 billion in new taxes on the backs of us, on our backs as taxpayers. The PNP is busy mashing up the country through disruptive and unsustainable policies, including their propensity to run with it, as we witnessed throughout the 90s and into the 2000s. Mr. President, the PNP cannot be trusted. And I can say it 40 times more. Mr. President, remember we have until 11 p.m. you know. Watch the ride, guy. Mr. President, the PNP's pie-in-the-sky promises are not credible and would imperil our country's hard-fought economic successes and bring the collective sacrifice we have all had to make over the years to naught. Mr. President, they are proposing to give up so much on the revenue side. For example, $11.4 billion from the NHT, asset tax, employment tax credit, to the extent that they propose to increase it from 30% to 40%. But what is curious, Mr. President, is that notwithstanding the considerable revenue flows that they are proposing to give up, that same desperate PNP turn around and are promising to do so much on the expenditure side. Them promising this and that and every single what's it not. They talk about a pro-box moment. Well, what the PNP is putting on the table, Mr. President, constitutes a tricks you moment. Their suite of policy proposals and how they plan to implement them and how they envisage them working, Mr. President, is simply not cogent, it is simply not coherent, it is simply not credible, and it is simply not compelling. They are proposing, Mr. President, to party with the rent money. And Jamaica cannot stand by and allow that to happen. So left the party alone. Got your yard and left the party alone. The people of Jamaica must reject the backwardness of the PNP, and the people of Jamaica, I dare say, must choose Jamaica, Mr. President. Mr. President, consequent on the PNP's massive political error in presenting pie-in-the-sky promises without appropriate costing, they have been the subject of considerable public ridicule, the kind of ridicule Lambert Brown gets every time the public sees him. Yes? So they have been the subject of considerable public ridicule. They have been the subject of considerable mockery. They have been the subject of considerable castigation. And Mr. President, they have been, the PNP that is, the subject of considerable pushback by the public. It is not surprising, Mr. President, to find that in circumstances where the proverbial light is now being shone on the PNP and its pie-in-the-sky promises, and they are now under microscope-like scrutiny. They are now being intensely interrogated. The opposition PNP, Mr. President, led by Mark Golding, they are now seeking to moderate and walk back their ridiculous pie-in-the-sky promises. They are now seeking, Mr. President, to pivot from platform bombast and wild promises, that is, campaigning in poetry, to a deliberate and tactical scaling down or walking back, if you may, of their promises in order to suppress and deflate the fiscal price tag of what it is that they have been promising. Mr. President, I suppose this is their whimsical attempt to transition from poetry to prose.
The budget debate, which is an exercise that is supposed to tell the country what it is the government plan to do in that fiscal year with the taxes that they collect. That is the main purpose of the budget. The budget is supposed to tell the people how much taxes will be collected, how much revenue the government anticipated will get, what it costs the government to run its operations, and what programs the government plan for that year. That is my understanding of what the budget is. The opposition's role is to look at the budget that the government is proposing and point out to the country, first of all, whether it is an achievable budget, yes or no, because we need to know. Remember, we put them there to represent us, and the government will come with something, especially in an election year. It is critical that we know whether or not what they're proposing is pie in the sky, and we need our opposition to tell us. Favor went on to say later on that they never did any such thing. They never critiqued one thing in her budget. They never said one thing was not credible or achievable. Therefore, we must suppose that in their view, that what it is the government coming with is indeed credible and achievable. So their purpose in the parliament would have been fulfilled, and their role, even as much as they never said so, but by not saying so, it means they see nothing in the budget to fault. You following? Yes. So they have nothing to fault the government for in terms of their proposed expenditures, in terms of the tax revenue and the capital budget and how that is supposed to be spent. They have no issue with that at all, meaning that if they were the government, they would have done the same thing. So having nothing to critique the budget on, what the Englishman is telling us, that they crafted a speech not to look into the government and what they are proposing and critique it, Because it's an election year in another 6 months or less, we'll be having an election. They decided to go into the House and not spend the time telling us about the government's budget. Instead, to tell us about, because no matter how the budget look perfect, there must be something in it they could talk about. They have been doing it for years. So therefore, they decide to take the time and deliver of themselves a manifesto. What it is, let me tell you what he said. We presented our proposals, our policy commitments for the next PNP government. Isn't that what is found in a manifesto? So what exactly were we looking at in Mark Goling's budget presentation? It was not a budget presentation. He went into the House of Parliament with a political campaign. In political campaign into the Parliament. And him went talk about Andrew Holness talk for 5 hours, and that was not appropriate. You know, say there's a man, there's something wrong with him. You know, from when me I tell you, says the man not right in him head, the man is sick. The man gone in with Parliament. The Constitution does not recognize political party. You will never see the name PNP, and you'll never see JLP in there. It speaks about the senators and the members of Parliament and how they should be selected and when the election cycle run. And him take up himself, gone in with Parliament, don't present a budget, but instead admitted on the Parliament floor that him carry his political campaign for the next general election in with Parliament. They need to go look and see if there's a rule about how you conduct these matters in the House and sanction him for it. He cannot be allowed to get away with it. This man from day one has no respect for the people of this country, nor the Constitution. Hell, him don't even have any respect for the People's National Party's Constitution, and him a look for turn Prime Minister. For do what? The behavior of this man is symptomatic of who he really is. He is the descendant and beneficiary, his old money that he inherited from his slave-owning great-grandparents. Benjamin Nunes and Esther Nunes, both of them buried in the Jewish cemetery in Montego Bay. Right? And so he feels a sense of privilege. He was the one who came here and made us into slaves, and therefore him feel him can do any damn thing that him feel like it. This man is a sick, sick man, an unimportant imbecile, and he thinks that he's it, and therefore him can come into a Parliament and run him election campaign if that is what he feels like doing. And these little black slaves that are in the Parliament, him don't expect them to be able to do anything because them is a bunch of cowards. That's what he thinks. This imbecile needs to be disciplined. He need to be disciplined, Mas Andrew. Discipline him. Make him understand. So daddy sharp in our Parliament.